Okay, I'll give another 20 seconds. All right, I'll get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Housed in Cambridge Discrimination in Appraisals and Lending presentation. My name is Carolina Almonte, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the attorney investigator for the Human Rights Commission. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. Before I get started, please keep in mind that the Commission does not and cannot provide any legal advice. So nothing in today's presentation should be considered legal advice. If you do need to consult with a lawyer, we can provide contact information for legal services or other referrals for you to consult an attorney. Along those lines, if you have any questions during our Q&A portions, please keep them general. Please do not share any personal details or any other identifying information when asking a question. Any questions before we begin? Great. So for today's session, I will start by giving a quick overview of the Human Rights Commission and discuss our complaint process, as well as who can file a complaint with us and who those complaints can be against. I will then go over appraisal discrimination and lending discrimination, including some examples. Then I will discuss some potential outcomes of our complaint process. And lastly, I will go over the different enforcement agencies so you have an understanding of how we're different from other agencies that also handle discrimination complaints. The Q&A will be at the end of this presentation, but if we're doing well on time, I will try to answer questions during my presentation. So you can either raise your hand on Zoom or you could enter a question in the chat box. And I do see a question I'll answer live quickly. I'm happy to share these slides with any attendees. All right, so jumping in, what do we do? So the Human Rights Commission is a city law enforcement agency. We're located at 51 Inman Street on the 2nd floor in Cambridge, so not at City Hall. We're just about a few blocks away. And our job is to receive and investigate complaints of discrimination that occur in Cambridge. So we do get many housing related complaints, but we also accept complaints in employment, education, and public accommodations. Our job is to enforce two city ordinances, the Cambridge Human Rights Ordinance, which is where the employment and public accommodations and education complaints fall, and the Cambridge Fair Housing Ordinance. These ordinances prohibit discrimination based on protected categories, which are race, color, national origin, sex, physical or mental disability, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, age, family status, marital status, military status, and source of income. So now that you have a general understanding of the Human Rights Commission, let's discuss jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is the authority granted by our ordinances to the Commission to investigate and rule on legal matters. And that's according to the subject matter of the case, as well as the geographical region in which the issue took place. So at the Commission, we can accept cases if the discrimination occurred in the city of Cambridge. So what this means is that a complainant can live outside of the city, but the respondent business, institution, housing provider, bank, or individual alleged to have discriminated must reside in Cambridge. Also, the alleged discrimination must have occurred within the past 180 days, which is roughly 6 months. There is an exception if the conduct first occurred prior to the 180-day mark, but it is ongoing. And the last kind of element or prong that must be met is that the alleged discrimination must have been based on the complainant's membership in a protected class. So those were like race, national origin, sexual orientation, etc. The last thing I want to point out is that we cannot accept any complaints against City of Cambridge agencies. So those can be filed at the Mass Commission Against Discrimination, which I'll discuss later on. So these next two slides will just kind of be a quick summary of our complaint process and to give you an overview of what that looks like. So generally our process begins with interviewing complainants, which I would do. It could be in person, it could be via email, it could be on the phone. And my goal is to make sure that the complaint meets our jurisdictional requirements. Then I assist complainants with drafting a complaint, but please keep in mind that that doesn't mean that I would represent you. It just means that we provide that additional service of drafting the complaint. And then once that's drafted and signed, I would then serve it on the respondents. So that could be the landlord, property manager, bank, the party who has alleged to have discriminated in some way. Once respondents receive your complaint, they have 10 days to respond, and I would get a copy and you would get a copy. After that, you can submit a rebuttal. I would then interview witnesses. I would review relevant documents, and I would review relevant case law throughout this process. At any point in this process, we also serve as a mediator, which means that I would work with both parties to see if there's a resolution that can be reached. And if that is successful, then the complaint can be resolved through mediation and a settlement agreement that I would draft. If not, I would continue my investigation to the determination stage, where I would either find probable cause or evidence that discrimination exists, or a lack of probable cause that discrimination occurred. So if probable cause is found, at that point, we do attempt again to conciliate or mediate the complaint. And that would be looking at a mutually acceptable outcome for both parties. And at that point, we also do like to include public interest provisions, and that could be anti-discrimination training that respondents would attend. It could be a change in procedures or policies. Ultimately, we would like to end the discriminatory treatment. And oftentimes there could be a financial monetary compensation or remedy for the complainant. The other thing I'll note that with housing cases, which are a little different than employment or public accommodation cases, if probable cause is found, either party can elect to send that case to the Attorney General's office for filing. And what would happen is that case would then just move over to the AG's office, and they would start a separate investigation and potentially file it in Superior Court. If lack of probable cause is found, then the case is dismissed with us. We don't have an appeals procedure. So at that point, you retain your ability to file your own private action in court, but our involvement ends at that point. So who is protected in housing discrimination cases? Our ordinance protects applicants for public housing, the private rental market, shelters, and commercial spaces. It protects tenants, so people already living in these environments, in apartments, public housing, shelters, or commercial spaces. Any potential home buyers or commercial space buyers. Also complainants who speak out against discriminatory practices. I have a slide on retaliation later on. And credit and mortgage seekers. In terms of which housing providers are covered or who can these complaints be filed against, that includes owners, it includes landlords and their employees, real estate agents and agencies, apartment managers, management companies, it could be banks, mortgage companies, or appraisers, which we're talking about today. It could be homeowners insurance companies, it can be public housing authorities. So generally, if you're on a deed, you may be liable. It could be an absentee landlord as well. The other thing to note is that the Cambridge Housing Authority is not a city agency, so we do accept complaints against the Cambridge Housing Authority. There is a small exception to owner-occupied homes with 2 units or less, or if a person is renting a unit in their home. But keep in mind that if you're not sure if we have jurisdiction to accept your complaint, you can still contact us and we would determine that after an intake. So now let's chat about what is appraisal discrimination. So as we may know, home ownership has been the primary way that people have built wealth. However, due to a history of discriminatory housing practices or policies, some folks, and this could be primarily brown and Black folks, have not had equal access to this wealth building opportunity. So appraisal discrimination occurs when a property appraisal is influenced by factors such as a person's race, national origin, religion, sex, or other protected class, rather than solely based on the property market value. So appraisal discrimination can lead to unfair treatment, inequitable access to housing, and financial losses. So to comprehend appraisal discrimination, it's important to understand the appraisal process itself. So this is an overview of the 5 general steps that happen. An appraisal should be an unbiased professional opinion of a home's value, and it is required whenever a mortgage is involved in buying, refinancing, or selling property. A qualified appraiser creates a report based on an in-person inspection, research into recent sales of similar properties, current market trends, and details of the home, including its size, condition, floor plan, and amenities. Typically, the borrower usually pays for their appraisal fee, which can range anywhere from $300 to $500. And this is an overview of the steps that you would normally see. So step 1 would be a property inspection, then data analysis, market research, then determining the property value and doing comparative analysis and adjustments based on other homes in the area. And then that's when you would get the final appraisal report. So what are some examples that we may see of appraisal discrimination? These are 4 that tend to be most common, but this is not an exhaustive list. So one example could be racial bias. So that's when an appraiser may devalue a property located in a neighborhood predominantly occupied by Black people based on the assumption that the neighborhood is less desirable or less safe than a predominantly white neighborhood. There could also be language bias. So an appraiser may devalue a property owned by someone who speaks English as a second language or with an accent based on the assumption that they are less educated than native English speakers. There could be a disability bias. So that's when an appraiser may devalue a property that is accessible for people with disabilities based on the assumption that it is less desirable or less marketable to non-disabled buyers. Lastly, there could be age bias. So that's when an appraiser may devalue a property owned by an elderly person or located in a retirement community based on the assumption that it is less desirable to younger buyers or that the property may not appreciate in value as much over time. So regarding signs of discrimination, appraisal discrimination can be subtle, but it does have significant implications. So these are some signs that may be helpful to keep an eye out for. 1 would be inconsistent valuation based on the property features. 2, it could be ignoring recent property improvements. 3, it could be the appraiser's biased comments or behaviors. So keep an eye out on that. And 4, it could be discrepancies between appraisals for similar properties. What we also would like to recommend and encourage is gathering evidence. Collecting evidence is crucial in supporting your claim of appraisal discrimination. So this is just some suggested evidence that we recommend that you would keep. 1 would be a detailed property documentation and photographs. 2 would be comparative appraisals for similar properties. 3, witness statements, especially if you have someone with you when there's an appraisal, just kind of keeping any notes or documents regarding what exactly happened during the appraisal. And 4, the appraiser's comments and or communications would be very helpful to review during the investigative process. So as I kind of discussed earlier on, appraisal discrimination can have various negative effects. So the first would be, of course, limited access to fair housing opportunities. 2, it would be lower property valuations and potential financial losses. 3 could be hindered wealth accumulation. As we talked about, home ownership is one of the biggest tools to building wealth. And 4, of course, is reinforcement of systemic inequities, which of course we're trying to fight against as a fair housing agency. So next I'll go over lending discrimination. So what is lending discrimination? Ultimately, it occurs when lenders treat borrowers differently based on factors such as race, national origin, religion, sex, or other protected characteristics, rather than evaluating them solely on their credit worthiness. Lending discrimination can lead to unequal access to credit, as well as higher interest rates and limited opportunities for financial growth. So when does lending discrimination occur? These are also some examples that we may see, but of course there's more than these 4. But one would be racial discrimination. So that's when a lender may deny or charge higher interest rates to borrowers based on their race or national origin without considering their creditworthiness or other relevant factors. It can be seen as sex discrimination when a lender may deny or charge higher interest rates to borrowers who are women based on the assumption that women are less likely to repay their loans. 3 could be age discrimination. So that's when a lender may deny or charge higher interest rates to older borrowers based on the assumption that they are more likely to default on their loans or have shorter repayment periods. And 4, disability discrimination. So that's when a lender can deny or charge higher interest rates to borrowers with disabilities based on the assumption that they have a lower income or more likely to default on their loans. So just to go into it a bit deeper, these are the 2 kind of types of lending discrimination that we can see. So the first is direct discrimination. So that of course occurs when a lender explicitly treats borrowers differently based on a protected class. But it could also be indirect discrimination. So that's when lenders have policies or practices that may seem neutral, but disproportionately affect certain groups. So besides the examples I shared on the last slide, some other examples could be redlining, predatory lending, and credit scoring disparities, which are important to discuss. And just to go into them, because you may have heard of these kind of 3 categories in the past, redlining is a practice where lenders or financial institutions systematically deny or make difficult for residents in certain neighborhoods, often this would be low income or minority communities, to access loans or credit. So this practice indirectly discriminates against individuals based on their location rather than their individual creditworthiness. Predatory lending occurs when lenders take advantage of vulnerable borrowers by offering them loans with excessively high interest rates, hidden fees, or unfair terms. This practice can disproportionately affect low-income individuals, minorities, or other marginalized groups, indirectly discriminating against them by exploiting their financial vulnerability. And the third kind of bucket would be credit scoring disparities. So credit scoring models may inadvertently disadvantage certain groups. For example, if a credit scoring algorithm heavily weighs factors like previous mortgage payments or a long credit history, it may disproportionately disadvantage young people, immigrants, or individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds who may not have the opportunity to build such credit histories. So these are some red flags to look at to try to uncover maybe some signs of lending discrimination that we would encourage you to keep an eye out for. The first would be unequal treatment during the application process. The second would be higher interest rates without clear justification. The third would be disparities in loan approval rates for different groups of people. And the fourth, of course, would be, discriminatory comments or practices by lenders. So, what they say verbally or via emails or in communications with lenders. We also want to make sure that, you have rights as a borrower. So the first, of course, is equal treatment. So you do have the right, regardless of your background, to be treated fairly and without discrimination during the lending process. You also have a right to information. So lenders must provide clear and accurate information about loan terms, interest rates, and fees. If anything is unclear, you have a right to ask for clarifying questions or for additional information. And the third, of course, is that you have a right to privacy. So your personal and financial information should be kept confidential and protected. So in terms of protecting yourself against lending discrimination, the first that we really want to stress is to educate yourself and learn about fair lending laws, your rights, and what constitutes lending discrimination, such as what I shared in the last slide. Also, comparison shopping. So explore multiple lenders and loan options to ensure you're receiving competitive terms and rates. Also, document everything for your own sake, and if you're alleging any sort of discrimination, those are the kind of documents I would like to review during the investigation. So document everything would make it for a much smoother process to try to look at the issues. And that, means all interactions. So with lenders, including any emails, applications, loan offers, even documenting phone calls if you can. And also seek assistance. Like as we've shared, if you suspect lending discrimination, even if you're not sure, I would encourage you to reach out to us and we can have that conversation and see if filing a complaint makes sense. Or you could reach out to a fair lending attorney or a private attorney if you have direct legal questions or are seeking legal advice. So one question we get often is, after filing a complaint with us, what are the potential outcomes? As I shared, we do attempt to mediate or conciliate all complaints, and that of course can happen at any point in the process, including before the finding of either probable cause or lack of probable cause. During this process, often complainants are seeking monetary compensation, and as I shared before, we like to ask for public interest provisions, such as anti-discrimination trainings or revised policies. Because of course, we do want to help the complainant that has brought a complaint to us. And as a city agency, we also want to eliminate any future violations of our ordinances by making sure that people are adequately trained, they know what the law is, and then they correct any policies that seem problematic. If probable cause is found, the remedies for a successful complaint for housing cases can include damages and civil fines. It can include penalties and other sanctions. It's really a case-by-case analysis, so there's not kind of a one-size-fits-all outcome based on the case. So it would depend on the nature and the extent of this discrimination. Also, if it gets to that point, we may also require rather than recommend that respondents take remedial actions. So these could include, as I said, a change of policies to ensure fair lending. It could be an implementation of training programs for employees, and also monitoring to ensure compliance with anti-discrimination laws. We also want to make a point to share, because we know that sometimes folks may be nervous to file a housing discrimination complaint, that retaliation is covered by our ordinance as a separate issue. So what that means is that it is illegal to retaliate against any person for making a complaint, testifying, assisting, or participating in any manner in a proceeding under the complaint process at any time, even after the investigation has been completed. It is also illegal to retaliate against any person because that person reported a discriminatory practice to a housing provider or other authority. So if you believe that you have experience with retaliation you can file a complaint. Also, if you feel like you've experienced retaliation while a complaint is active, we can amend complaints to include that as a charge. And here we just have some additional forms of discrimination besides appraisal, discrimination, and lending that we often see at the commission. So one could be inquiring about membership in a protected category. It could be refusal or delay to rent, lease, negotiate, or sell a property. Discriminatory terms and conditions. So that's when you're living in an apartment and you don't have access to the same amenities as someone outside of your protected class, or you're just treated differently than folks outside of your protected class. Misrepresenting availability of housing. That could be a real estate agent saying, there's nothing available in this apartment complex, but you see them listed online. Different where I'm at, steering. And that's when a real estate agent is basically saying, you may want to look for housing in this location to steer people out of other neighborhoods. Discriminatory lending. We talked about discriminatory advertising. So that, of course, if you're advertising, no Section 8 allowed in a Craigslist ad, that's something that is against our ordinance and we would want to know about. Use of intimidation or coercion. And then this also includes denial of reasonable accommodations or modifications, which is a type of complaint that we see often. So in this side, I just wanted to go over the different enforcement agencies and talk about the ways that we're similar as well as different. So HUD, or the Department of Housing and Urban Development, is our federal fair housing agency. So what's interesting about HUD is that they have determined that our ordinance is substantially equivalent to the Federal Fair Housing Act. So that means that they have authorized us to investigate complaints on their behalf regarding federally protected classes. So it would be dual filed both with us as well as HUD. They have a 1-year statute of limitations, so that's longer than our 180-day statute of limitations. And oftentimes, if you file a complaint with HUD, but the discriminatory act took place in Cambridge, they may refer the case to us. The Mass Commission Against Discrimination is our state counterpart. So they similarly investigate complaints of discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodations. The main difference, though, is that they cover the whole state. So if something happened in Somerville or a different municipality, they would be the best agency to contact. And if something happened outside of our 180-day statute of limitation, they should also be the agency to contact because they have a 300-day statute of limitation. So they would be the best agency. And then, as I've talked about, we're the Human Rights Commission. So we enforce the Fair Housing Act as well as our 2 ordinances. The other difference is we don't enforce our state anti-discrimination laws. We enforce our ordinance. So they say very similar things, but those would just be the differences. So any of these can be options, but that way you can know which one may be the best fit based on the issue that you've experienced. And that's the end of my presentation. We wanted to be sure to let you know, once again, where we're located. So 51 Inman Street on the 2nd floor. The best phone number to call for phone intake would be 617-349-4396. You can also email us at hrc@cambridgema.gov. And I would also encourage you to go to our website. We do have an online intake form, which is the probably easiest way to file a complaint because that gets sent to our mailbox and then I can reach out to you to schedule a time to do a further intake. I also want to note that we do have interpreter services available. So if English is not your primary language, we can make sure to set up a time when I could talk with someone who can help with the intake. And these are some web resources that may be helpful just to keep in mind. Our Office of Housing Liaison is awesome. We partner with them often, especially if you have a housing issue that isn't necessarily a complaint or questions about housing in Cambridge. we recommend that you reach out to the housing liaison. The Mass Commission Against Discrimination, which I talked about, that's their website. They also, I believe, have an online intake form, accept mail-in complaints and walk-ins as well. They're located in downtown Boston near Government Center. The Mass Attorney General's Office is another referral that you may want to keep in mind. They have a civil rights division, and they also can accept intakes as well. And then that's the email for HUD, which, like I said, we're substantially equivalent to the Fair Housing Act. So if you did want to file a housing complaint that happened in Cambridge, we would encourage you to contact us first, but you can contact HUD as well. And that's the end of my presentation. I'll take a pause to see what questions we have. Okay, I see a question here from one of our participants. So she wants to know, how many complaints of lending and appraisal discrimination did we receive in 2022? And how many cases did we find probable cause? So we get many housing discrimination complaints. The number of specifically lending and appraisal discrimination complaints isn't the highest. I would say the top three we would get would be disability discrimination regarding reasonable accommodations, source of income discrimination, so folks who are denied housing because they have a Section 8 voucher or alternate forms of discrimination. And the third bucket would probably be, you know, I would say harassment in housing. So if there's another tenant who is you know, treating you poorly, there is a duty for landlords to mitigate in that scenario. So I don't have a specific number. I would say it's very low. And regarding the ones that we have received, I'm not sure if we had found probable cause, but I can't share kind of specifics about that. But I would say it's just not the highest that we're seeing personally in Cambridge, but in other places, I would say in the US, especially California, for some reason, they do have a lot of appraisal discrimination cases, including a big lawsuit that I think took place last year, where someone asked for an appraisal as a Black family, and then they got a second opinion and they took down all of their family pictures and put up kind of a white family, and their house was appraised $500K more. So definitely happens, but I would say not so much in Cambridge. Okay, and then we have another question here. Are landlords required to accept Section 8 and vouchers by law? So the answer to that is yes. You can't just deny someone housing because they have a voucher. You know, in terms of kind of a tenant screening process, it should be equally applied to all applicants. You know, so if someone's denied for, you know, another reason, that's okay, but you can't just outright, you know, deny someone because they have a voucher, because that would be considered source of income discrimination in the city. To stay on for a bit longer if anyone else has any other questions. If no one has any other questions, please keep my contact information. If you do have other questions or want to file a complaint in the future, we're always available. And we do these kind of webinars often, so please stay connected, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.